even though it doesn't seem like you can change the system, which definitely is broken, you are a blessing to that community.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the She Just Got Going podcast, a podcast about entrepreneurship and career advice. I'm very excited to be recording a career advice episode today with Chelsea Aghachi. She is a medical doctor, busy with her last few months of internship, and we're just going to be able to, pick her brain about the medical profession, but specifically being a medical doctor in South Africa. So yeah, Chelsea, thank you so much for being on the episode today. Can you just tell people a little bit about your study background, so like where you studied, where you pretty much did your community service? And
Hi Ella, thank you so much for having me on the show. I'm Chelsea, like you said, Chelsea Aghachi. I'm 25 years old. I'm a junior doctor technically because I finished studying, just doing like the last 6 months of my internship and then community service. So I studied at the University of Pretoria, Tuks of Nuks to represent. And yeah, it was 6 years. So with me, I was fortunate enough to get into medicine straight out of high school. I know a lot of people go through the BSc program, but yeah, luckily I was able to go in directly and yeah, finished in time. And yeah, I'm just excited to be on the show and shed a bit of light on this career path in SA.
Yeah, you did a little bit better than just finish on time. Like you did finish cum laude. So, I mean, well done to you for that.
Yes, it's there.
Just putting it out there. But no, I think it's really important because, a really difficult thing to go and study already. So I mean, to finish that cum laude is no small feat. And so also again, like I'm having you on the podcast because you're a high achiever in the field, but you can also give that honest perspective of what it was like. Because again, I don't think anything came easy to you. You are a very hard worker. And so yeah, I just want to jump into like the first question, which is, did you always know you wanted to study medicine? So how did you get into medicine?
So I always joke and say that like medicine's kind of like the family business. My older brother did medicine, my dad did medicine, and apparently if you go back in my history, my great grandfather or something was like a medicine man in the village. So yeah, I always joke that it's like a family business, but I think I was exposed to it at an early age and just saw a bit about what happens, but just the idea of being a doctor just stuck. And yeah, so I always sort of knew I wanted to do it. But going back, looking back now, maybe I would have explored other sort of aspects in the medical field that might not necessarily be medicine itself.
Yes. So like you said, you got exposed to it at a young age. So did you ever like go to work with your dad or like your brother? I'm not sure if he's your older brother and if he's already practicing, but did you get an exposure to the actual field before, making that decision?
So I got exposed to a part of it, but I saw, so my dad was in private practice. He had his own practice where he'd see patients in his own time. And I guess that comes after years of going through like being in the game for years. So he was at that stage of his career where it's like, I come in when I want, like I see patients when I want, and like having that, but I didn't know like what goes into getting to that stage. So I was exposed to a softer side of it.
Okay, cool. So then when you actually now knew that you wanted to go into medicine, study in South Africa, so I know because I got a glimpse of it a little bit with my sister's applications process, but it's quite even a process to even apply to it in university. So can you just walk people through like the process you actually had to go through to prepare an application for med school before you matriculated?
Okay, so the application itself, like the journey, some would argue, starts from like grade 8 or from like an early age, but I'd say the pivotal sort of year in schooling is grade 11, because those are the marks you use to apply the next year. So grade 11, I'd say, is quite an important year, but it's not the have all and be all. So you use your grade 11 marks to apply. Most people would suggest, if you can, apply to all the 8, which is apparently now 9 schools, med schools in the country. I think a new one started, I don't know if it was last year or the year before, in Eastern Cape, but yeah, they'd advise applying to as many of the 8 med schools that you can, or if you have that capacity.
Yes.
And what will happen is that also a requirement is to write the NBTs. So I think that's for most of the select courses. I think architecture, engineering, even accounting, I'm not sure, require that. Yeah, and so midway through matric, you find, or towards the end, you find out if you're provisionally accepted or not. Some people only find out in January after the matric results.
Wow.
And so, that's sort of the process. So they look at your NBT results as well as your grade 11 results for provisional application. But the final say comes from the matric results. And so that is the process of getting in.
Yes. Okay. So, with the NBT, I know I literally only learned about what that was when I had to write it in like end of grade 11. So, for people that don't know, for students that don't know what your NBT will be, it's your national benchmark test, and they pretty much get you to write this benchmark test with your maths and your English, just to check that you're actually competent in those areas for whatever program you want to apply to. And preparing for it, I don't know if you got preparation for it, but I know like there are many like places around that offer tutoring and prep for those exams, and then you write them on the day. They are quite long papers, and so quite long. I think mine was like 5-6 hours. So did you do any prep for it, or were you always just gifted mathematically and linguistically?
It's actually so strange. So they say like it's based off of like what you've already sort of done, but it depends also which month of the year you write. So some of the things that do come up is maybe something your school would have done towards the end of their curriculum, but yeah, there are many places that prep you. But I'd say going over your schoolwork, the stuff you have, for me, that's what I did, and I guess it went okay. It wasn't my best mark that I've ever gotten, but it was okay. Okay.
Yeah, it's true. Those marks, don't try to compare them to what you're getting in school, because they will really surprise you. But yeah, they have those minimum requirements.
Exactly.
When you're applying at university, they do show you what you would need to be getting minimum for your MBT to even be considered. So there is like that threshold, but obviously you want to outperform the threshold. So then my next question is, now, you've actually graduated and, already finishing up your internship. And I want to just get real and honest about what your journey of studying medicine was like. A lot of people believe this is for them, and like you said, go the BSc route, study, and then, only begin the program. And I think, like we were talking before, we were just saying how, schools really try their best to sort of like give us insights into different careers so that we can be prepared when we actually apply for university and know that this is something that we might be good at doing, or something we'd want to do as a career. And now, both of us agreed, having our degrees and everything, that it just nothing prepares you for what university is like. And the podcast is supposed to be a little bit of a resource out there just to give people a more holistic picture into entrepreneurship, into careers. And so can we get a little bit candid about your medical journey? It's not meant to be negative, just like honest highs and lows, and how it was for you.
Yes. So I can speak on medicine specifically at SACS, because the different universities divided a bit differently. So the journey in general of studying medicine in South Africa is divided into your years where you do the medical sciences, so a lot of the science behind medicine, and then later as you go, it becomes more clinical. So what I mean by that is that you do the fundamental sciences of medicine, which is your anatomy, physiology, biochemistry. So you do it on like a micro level. And all these sort of medical sciences themselves, interestingly enough, are whole BSc degrees on their own. So you can do a 4-year BSc degree in physiology, for example, where you take that time, you learn it properly, you learn it at a good pace. But what I notice, especially in the fundamental years, is that it's fast-paced and it's quick. So a lot of it is getting into the habit of studying daily and learning to study a lot of information and retain a lot of information in a short amount of time. Like my mom's an engineer, but my dad's a doctor. So they always joke that like medicine isn't hard. It's just trying to like retain a lot of information all at once. But something like engineering, it's like constant application. So yeah, the fundamental years, it's just about glue on the bum, sitting down and studying and learning your study style, because a lot of people don't retain information the same way. And a lot of people find the first 2 years hard, especially at times, because you go from this environment where you have teachers that are teaching you, pushing you, motivating you, to a space where you're all on your own. Like you'll come to lectures, you'll come to this and that, but you're on your own. And so yeah, that's the first couple of years. So your physiology, your basic sciences, and then as you go on, you go into your more clinical and practical years, where maybe the things you did in first and second year isn't like as, it's not as upfront, but it's the application of that into a clinical context, into an actual human being here in front of you. Like, so in the fundamental years, you learn how the heart works and what causes it to beat like this, blah, blah, blah. But as you go on further, you learn that, okay, this is the disease of the heart and this is how it shows in a person, and just the application of that. So depending on the type of person you are, some people do extremely well in the fundamental sciencey part because they're just good at studying, and then find the clinical part a bit more challenging. Others, it's vice versa. They might not be able to cope with studying loads of information all at once in this like fundamental phases, but clinically they know how to apply certain things when it comes to an actual human being. So those are like the challenges certain people may face. But above and beyond that, another thing that gets challenging in the clinical years is just seeing the reality of the healthcare system. It's no longer this thing of you're studying medicine in theory. You're seeing the real thing, and like how, for example, the textbook says this, but we're doing that because, for example, in your textbook they say these are the medications used to treat A, B, and C, but the hospital you work at only has this medication on tender, and so the tender only pays for this medication, so that's what they have, whereas these medications will benefit more. So I think that's also a challenging thing emotionally to go through, and just seeing the realities of it. But overall, my experience, I divide my experience of medicine or university into my university experience, like me as Chelsea going to university, and the actual studying of medicine. So the actual studying of medicine, it was interesting. Like studying medicine is interesting. You learn a lot, but the fact that it's high paced and there's no time to like sort of stop and like have like a sort of whimsical experience of what you're studying and how knowledgeable you're becoming. Like it's just go all the time, and like you get into this habit of constantly studying daily, constantly working daily. So there's that aspect that I would say is challenging, but overall I'm glad for my university experiences, the friends I made, the growth that happened. And they say you make friends as you cry together. So my med school friends and what we went through, and the lecturers, the clinicals, practicals that we went to, it's like stories and experiences that we'll have for a lifetime. So even though it was hard, I'm not going to lie, there were parts that were challenging, but going through it with some of the people I met, like, made it all worthwhile.
Yes, that's super awesome. And yeah, it's true. The people you also experience uni with can make or break your uni experience as well. So I'm glad to hear that you had friends that
Yeah.
you have experiences that you'll carry for life. And yeah, so you were talking about your experience with being a medical student at Tux. And so I just wanted to talk about that the part where you've mentioned it's very fast paced. You never really catch a break. So pretty much now study life balance. And yeah, although people always say you don't have time for anything else as a medical student, how did you balance your studies and make sure that you stayed on top of things, and also just like made sure you didn't burn out, if that's even possible as a medical student?
Hmm. I think I'll always go back to what so I lived in res. So one of the res seniors told me in terms of like balancing, because if you know how res used to be like at Tug, it used to be super traditional, always activities, always events. And so within medical res as well. So going back to what one of my seniors said is that you'll never remember the night you took to study, like for those extra hours. You'll never really remember that, but you'll remember the time you took to maybe get to know your roommate, or do serenade, or cultivate some of your talents. So she was very pro balancing, because the thing is, the setting that balancing in varsity helps you further on, because you'll have to balance. For some people who want to be a mom or a homemaker as well, like balancing all of that and still having the degree. So I'm not gonna lie, my first 2 years did not have a healthy balance. It was work. I even remember, like, one of my closest friends, like, I didn't go to a birthday dinner because I'm like, no, we're writing a test on the Thursday, and meanwhile it's Saturday. I was just so caught up in constantly having to study. But I think it was in my third year, towards the end of my second year, where I realized, like, I can't live like this. I have to balance my life, or structure my life in a way that makes time for both, And I think a big part of that was like planning in a sense, planning to have free time. So I would work every day. Like, I definitely encourage, like, anyone in like a health science profession, have a time you set aside to work every day. But outside of that time that you allocate, do other things, like go to the gym, go for a run. You can't just be all work and no play. And some people have this philosophy of like working hard during the week so that weekends you can take off. Other people prefer to go hard on the weekend, like in terms of studying and everything, and then during the week take it easy. So I kind of used a bit of that depending on what rotation, because depending on the rotation, sometimes we'll write Fridays, we'll have our big tests. So then you have a free weekend. But other rotations, you'll write Monday, so the weekend is quite intense. So I think planning to have free time is what I use to balance, and also not being too hard on myself, And yeah.
So the question I'm about to ask next is like a question I ask everyone on the podcast. I think you may have answered it a little bit for yourself, but we'll see. So the first question I always ask is, what was one piece of advice now, knowing what you know, being on the journey you've been on, what one piece of advice would you give younger Chelsea before, she went on to study medicine? And then, the second question is, what was one of your biggest fears or obstacles that you had back then that you had to overcome, and how you overcame it?
Okay. Very interesting, insightful questions. Like, you're making me really look into myself. But to answer the first one, advice I'd give Chelsea is to focus on learning, the process of learning, than the outcome of learning. One thing I learned, especially now doing practical medicine, is that it's not about getting 80 or whatever for the test. You can get that for the test, but have you really learned something, I'd put more emphasis on truly learning something than just getting an outcome, which is a good mark on the test, and then forgetting everything I studied. So I definitely tell her that focus on truly like acquiring knowledge than the outcome of a test, or like, because at the end of the day, like, these standardized tests aren't really a measure of knowledge. Like, you can pass a standardized test and still, have so many knowledge gaps. So I tell her, rather focus on the knowledge and not place your worth on the mark or the outcome of the results of the standardized test. And to answer your second question, a huge thing for me was anxiety. I did not know that I had anxiety and the different shapes or forms it came in until I actually rotated through my psychiatry block. I realized that, okay, it's not okay for people to constantly feel on the edge. Like, it's not a normal experience. And so for me, that was a major thing I had to get over. And the thing is, with medicine, as you go on practically, the practical years, it's no longer you alone taking the test. Like, we'll be on ward rounds with the doctor or the senior, and they'll ask you specifically a question. And if you can't answer it, a lot of the times you feel humiliated or embarrassed in front of everyone. And it's this thing of, whoa, everyone knows or everyone thinks I'm dumb. But looking in hindsight, like, that's not even the case. Like, people are all focused on themselves. Nobody's really thinking you're dumb. But I think getting over that anxiety and like the fear of like judgment for not knowing things, I think that was a big thing I overcame. That even now in internship, knowing that I still am a junior doctor, I still will make mistakes. There's still a lot I do not know. But being comfortable in knowing I don't know and saying, honestly, like, I don't know, but I'd like to know, and being honest about where I am. And yeah, I think so. That was a major thing, getting over anxiety and the fear of like people's judgment.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think it doesn't even just apply to medicine. I mean, a lot of people, students, deal with anxiety during their studies, and you don't really realize you've got like high functioning anxiety until like you're even out of it. And it's crazy how when you don't deal with it, it even has long lasting effects even after you've studied. I mean, I remember a couple of times once I had graduated and I knew I was done, like still waking up in a panic as if I've missed some sort of class test or class when I wasn't even studying anymore. And so yeah, just taking care of your mental health during that time, like, how did you now actually get over that? Because you said that was something you had to get over, but how did you tackle your anxiety? Was it during your studies, only after your studies? What was that experience like for you personally?
During my studies, and I guess for me a lot, it was reading books, my support system, and also like my beliefs and the people I surround myself with, and being open and honest with them. And just knowing that you can gain so much from like other people sharing their stories and how they got over what they went through, and knowing that it's a journey. I think the first step was in not taking myself too seriously. I don't know if that makes sense.
That makes
but
absolute
knowing
sense.
that, listen, I will make mistakes, and not being hard on myself. I think I needed to start by not being hard on myself and practicing this radical self-love, but not like in an arrogant way, like, oh, I love myself and too great to fail, but knowing that I am loved despite what I do and what I go through, and that if despite my flaws and my shortcomings, God or the universe or whatever the people on the podcast believe in can still accept me and love me for who I am despite my mistakes. Who am I to not accept and love myself in that way, And that mentality and philosophy really did carry me through it. Even in times where I'll do something cringy, I'm like, oh my God, it's so cringy. Like, how could I do that? And I said something stupid to the senior doctor, and just getting over it and letting go and knowing that I'm still loved. I am still a person, and I'm still worthy, you know?
It's awesome that you've mentioned that, because a lot of people will say, oh, but it comes with the job. It comes with studying medicine. It's already a stressful degree. I knew that coming into it. So this is just part of it. But I love that we're finally having more conversations about mental health and saying, like, functioning like this is not normal. And if you don't deal with it from a younger age, so many health issues can creep up even later. My dad is a mining engineer, and he pretty much, he's actually had to learn not necessarily the balance, but also just taking care of your health because of the stress that comes with the job, even into his 50s. I think he started in his 40s. And taking that time out to go for a run, taking that time to exercise or to sit outside, enjoy the fresh air, and just actually, take those moments to pause, because at the end of the day, we have one body and we can't keep subjecting it to such intense emotions like that, intense environment like that, without actually finally dealing with it. So I'm happy to hear that you were able to deal with it with all the ways that you mentioned, your support system, even reading books. I love books. And so now I want to focus more on, your working in Cape Town, because that's where you did your internship. And so what was that experience like? And also, just the realness of working in the hospitals in Cape Town.
So, for me, coming from literally almost the other side of the country, it was almost like a culture shock as to how different things are this side. And the fact that even as a student, living in a bubble, not even knowing how the differences in healthcare in the different provinces are. When I compare Gauteng to Western Cape, I'm like, what's happening in Gauteng? But if one were to compare KZN to Gauteng, it's like, you know what I mean? And it all comes back to how money and resources are managed and distributed. And you'll see different hospitals have different cultures or things that are valuable to them. So I work at Curtis-Gear, which is a tertiary, almost quaternary hospital. So that means that all the other smaller hospitals, they refer their difficult, complicated cases here. And so when choosing where to go for internship, it's also a lot of it's also a difficulty people have. Should I go with a place that's not as specialized, where I'll get to do more things as a junior doctor? Or do I go to a place that's more academical and I can sort of learn things, but secondhand and from a distance? So I chose to go this route. There are pros and cons, but if I can honestly say, despite my personal struggles that I had and despite my personal victories as well, I'm so fortunate and feel so blessed to have done my internship here and get to see what healthcare really could be like in South Africa. If we globally managed and distributed our resources like this, where a patient who comes in with a sprained whatever, ankle or whatever, can go home with crutches, actual crutches, that each person gets crutches. It's not, oh, maybe come back in 5 days, we'll see if we'll get crutches for you, And so I've just been exposed to a lot of good things and things that make one think about how we can make this country better. Obviously, healthcare in SA, government healthcare, it has a bad reputation, but I'm fortunate enough that at my hospital, they do really go the extra mile for the patients. And even simple things like needles, syringes, things for IVs, it's widely accessible, and it's not a struggle to find what you need in terms of what will be best for the patient. Whereas in some settings, it's like, oh, we don't have this, or pharmacy is out of stock of this. And so it just makes it so difficult in caring for the patients. And I think that's also what's very draining on a lot of healthcare workers, wanting to help so badly, but then having your hands tied, oh no, this medication is not on tender, or no, we only have these ARVs. We don't have the newer ARVs that don't have side effects. And so we definitely are doing the best we can in a government setting at our hospital. But I know not all of my peers have that. But I'm also shout out to them for making the most with what they have. So I'd say my journey, it's been more about internal things and dealing with like imposter syndrome and people pleasing and working almost for the approval of my colleagues or seniors and how they perceive me. It was more overcoming that. But the work environment itself, I'm blessed and privileged to say that I do work in a good, clean, safe, resourced environment.
Yes, yeah. And, what would you say then? Like, I guess, the last question I have is, for people like you expressed who, again, you don't really get to choose placement. Like, I've heard so many stories of like you give your options and then like you can completely get blindsided with that. So, what will you say to people that find themselves maybe not in their first choice of hospital? It's not the greatest environment to work through, and it's like, this is not what I signed up for. I don't think I can push through this. What would you say to them?
Yeah, it's such a difficult situation because I have a friend who they applied for Cape Town, for example, for their community service, but they ended up getting rural Peru, for example. And so it can be a big jump and a shock. But one thing I can say is that even though it might feel hard, you might feel drained, like you're pulled in so many directions, but you can go to bed and you can rest well knowing that you did so much for some of the least of the people in the community. Even the fact that you might feel like, oh, I wish I had more resources or this and this and that. The supposedly little you feel you're doing is making such a big impact in these communities because given the opportunity, to be honest, most doctors or young qualified professionals wouldn't go to these communities. And even though it's almost like you're forced to be there, you are like such a blessing to this community. And even though sometimes you might feel like, oh, I messed up or maybe this wasn't good enough, like the little you do or supposedly little does so much. And that one patient's life you change is changing a whole person's world. And so definitely do take care of your mental health because a lot of those particular hospitals or settings, as a junior doctor, you're expected to do so much and you might not feel ready. It's like they might call you to be the one to cut the C-section when you don't feel ready to cut the C-section or do the amputation or do the anesthetic for the patient. Like you're literally thrown into the deep end and you might not have that senior support. But I just say back yourself, back the knowledge you've acquired, and just know that you are, even though it doesn't seem like you can change the system, which definitely is broken, you are a blessing to that community.
Wow, that's really awesome. I mean, that's even inspired me. Even though I'm not in the healthcare field at all, but yeah, thank you so much for those amazing words, and I really hope that that's enough to just remind someone of the impact they make, even if they feel like it's not much. But Chelsea, thank you so much for your time today and for answering all our questions about the medical field.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, and I feel like if people want to reach out, I'll drop your social media links below so that if people have any questions about the medical profession, hopefully they can reach out or actually reach out in the comments. Actually, I don't know if I want to just give people's social medias out to the whole world at large, but you're on Instagram and not on LinkedIn. But we spoke about that briefly.
Yes.
For some reason, doctors in their internship years are not on LinkedIn. But I guess, thank you so much for your time today and really all the best with finishing up your internship and, whatever the future holds, whatever, you're looking into going into in terms of specialization. I wish you all the best. And guys, that's it for today's episode. So thank you for tuning in and tune in next time.